Good morning, Joe Wenberg, Bluebird, Semaphore. This is going to be World History for Ordinary People, 41, and I'm going to continue talking about India. But before I even do that, I just want to hold this up. And you remember a while back, I used one of these miniature whiteboards. But I was recently pleased to see another individual using it, and using it in a much better fashion than I do. And this was a young lady on YouTube discussing, talking about the circle of fifths, which is a musical theory concept. And she does a really good job. And if you're interested in a little music theory, I would recommend you go to YouTube, probably type in circle of fifths, and see what she has to say. But with India, first of all, once again, the Ocean City, New Jersey Library came through for me this weekend, and I got a number of books on India, and got some ways now of saying, I had talked around these two sites, early Indian civilization, and those sites are two cultures, the Harappan culture and another city, and they call it that because the city is named Harappan. This is like in the north and west of India, in the Indus Valley region, but the other city further south than Harappan is Mohenjo-Daro. Now, these were already well established by 2250 BCE, before the Common Era, and the culture itself spreads rather slowly, but by 2250, Harappan was already existing, and once again, I can't read my own writing, and which means to me that if it was already, up and running by 2250, and keep in mind we don't have a lot of historical evidence because there wasn't any writing, but the archaeology clearly puts it on the ground by 1750 BC. Now, and it was clearly up and running for another 400 years when they start to see a decline. They're not really sure why, but they get a decline going on. So, and this is information that I'm pulling out of these books that I got at the library this weekend. Similarly, they're talking about, well, just go step back a bit. When it comes to India, we really don't talk about a national political system. What we talk about is a national religion and a national spirituality. That's what these people lived by then, and for the next thousands of years, they continued from pre-Vedic times through to the Hindu times. And Aryans came into the scene, I forget what I wrote down here, maybe 1400. But the point is that from those times till now, the population is essentially Hindu, and it's the same practices. They have been able to retain their identity as a people via the spirituality and the practicing of Hinduism, and that practice includes the ceremony, ritual, and strong beliefs in family. They have many gods, and they're not upset that you may have a different god than they have, even though you're the same religion, the same faith. That is not a problem for them. There's as many people as there are. There could be that many gods that are prayed to, but that's probably an exaggeration. The point is that there's a lot of gods in the Hindu religion. And it must work because it's been around for thousands of years, which it's hard to say that about any other religion and in its original form. Because they didn't have writing, so they didn't write a lot about their beliefs, their religion. Okay? But what they did eventually do was write down their oral traditions, their memories of what the religion, where it came from, how it got started, and what it teaches. And that was all orally handed down, generation to generation, thousands of years. And unlike the Homeric traditions and stories and myths that were handed down, these within the Hindu religion are considered much more historically accurate. The reason given is that these were concepts and philosophies that were bound up in religion, in the spiritual world, that was extremely important to these people. They weren't playing around with little, love affairs and Prince carrying off this guy into another bad place and being chased and all that stuff, which you find in most of the other mythologies. And so to lump the Hindu stuff as mythology, that we don't know, because we only know that there seems to be a great deal of historical accuracy in these stories of creation in the Hindu world. So when it came to writing it down in such things as the Rig Veda, and I believe that got put on a paper, put down in writing 1300 BC, but the scholars say, well, this is the same thing they were saying orally back a couple of thousand years ago, because we have different ways of connecting the dots. And so they take that Rig Veda to be, whatever they're talking about in there, to be historically accurate. Now, have I read it? No, I read a couple of excerpts, but I haven't read it, and I probably never will. And, I don't want to call it the Upanishad, but there's others, many, many others that fall in this category of old, not written down when it was being transmitted orally, but then finally getting written down, and can be considered fairly accurate. So, and this now, once again, is in that Indus River Valley civilization. But eventually, by the 7th century BCE, the Ganges Valley starts to predominate and become the center of Indian population. And cities formed, population grew. Well, they had larger armies by that time, and they were using elephants for the purpose of facilitating manual operations of this or that. But armies, it was a statement that I had made that I was reading. I couldn't come across anything that said this very large army was attacking this other very large army, and I believe I said this in a former discussion, that which isn't the case with Central Asia and China. I mean, they always had 100,000, 150,000, sometimes 300,000, and they went on a march. So I never could come across anything like that for India. So I always felt that, maybe India was cut up in these little kingdoms, who knows what. Maybe they didn't have very large armies. But I did read something within the last 3 or 4 days, and gosh, if I can't find it again. But this certain Raj or Emperor, whatever, an Indian type, an Indian guy, and he went to war with an army of 750,000. So I guess they did have large armies, just are not seemingly written about them. So, I'm going to continue to look into this early Indian stuff because I find it intriguing. Like, for example, that's one book I got out of the library not today, a few days ago, Eastern Asia and Classical Greece. And they're talking about the ancient times. This is I think an Oxford University Press, J.M. Roberts. And in there I'm reading that they're talking about the transitioning out of the Indus Valley culture into the Ganges River Valley. And the author seemed to have said, at least what I interpreted, was that it wasn't very clear when these things happened. It wasn't very clear how India got its contact with the rest of the world, and makes the very valid point that it's an isolated country. It's got the Himalayas on the top, and it's got water everywhere else. So it's isolated. But he mentions, you can get through the Khyber Pass and the around, you got the Indian Ocean, which can take you to Arabia and up the Red Sea, and you could also go over to Southeast Asia for more trading and what have you. So although it was isolated, it did have contact with other parts of the world. But the reason why I'm going on and on with this is that I was reading in the book that it said, sorry about this, but it said that Stone Age culture, East Bengal, had association with Chinese influence. So we're talking Stone Age, so we're talking way back, and we're talking they can make certain accusations, certain assumptions of the culture we're talking about, Indian, with Chinese contact early on. So I thought that was great. I always love to read something like that. And when you know it, then at the very next page, they're talking about some myth with these, I don't know if it was which particular Indian part, with a myth of some sort, some brothers and looking after, going to try to find a brother's wife. And they illustrated it with a painting from, I think the painting was more like 19th or 18th century, but describing something that had happened as a myth, thousands of years ago. But the painting was so strikingly Chinese-like. It wasn't painted by a Chinese either, but once again, there was that influence. They talked about the Stone Age people being influenced by China. Now we have a painting made in 18th or 19th century, and it looked very Chinese. So influences are made all around. At the same time, well, I've been reading this stuff, and maybe even a little bit before then, I came across another interesting fact, which who would have thunk it? As you know, the Europeans came over and walked all over India, and that was being really controlled, watched over by the Parliament in Britain. And they would send out, governors and this general and that general, and they let them run their course 10 years, maybe 5 years. If they were really terrible, 2 years, and they got out of there. But they would run it, and of course they'd have to be replaced. So at one time, and I think it was around 1798, 1799, something like that, the end of the 18th century, they sent a Colonel Wesley to go there and take over the reins of the governor from whoever was being the governor at the time. And I think this was just being the governor of not the whole country, but a large segment. They had the so-called presidencies. You had the presidency of Delhi, the presidency of Calcutta, of Bengal, and of Bombay. And I forget right now which one he was sent out to be the president, which means it was basically at the top of any authority, So he gets sent out there, and I'm reading about it, and I come to find out he's the same guy who 10 years later we're really reading about, not maybe 10, maybe, I don't know, a short time thereafter, we're reading about him as the Duke of Wellington chasing Napoleon all over Europe and finally getting rid of him at the Battle of Waterloo. And so I never knew that. I mean, here's this guy seemingly shot out of nowhere, and before very long, he's at the head of the European coalition trying to knock down Napoleon, which they succeeded at. But it comes to find out, there was a lot of praise in this book about this guy. The Parliament and the people who have a say in these sorts of things thought that this guy, Wesley, had all the right qualities for a large-scale leadership role, a large-scale political and martial role. And he seems to have done very well. Everywhere he went, he was adored, loved by the British subjects. And what I also find very interesting, that he's on the scene essentially the same time as the other great hero of British history, Lord Nelson. So Nelson's fighting on the seas, and he's fighting the same old French. And Wellington's on the land fighting the same old French. Unfortunately for Nelson, he takes some shafts from the yardarms and the masts, and maybe even some shot, but he takes it at that last battle of Trafalgar, and he succumbs to that, and along with hundreds of famous paintings of him expiring on the deck of a ship. And it's marvelous, I think. Not that I'm not a big proponent of war, I'm not, but some of these moments in war are just so extraordinary. And the men so blindly brave, just blinded by heroism to put themselves in all that danger. So, and they're entombed, I think, almost side by side in Westminster Abbey, the Hall of National Heroes for the Brits. So I wanted to bring that up, that the the Duke of Wellington had his hand in India. And what I thought at the time I was reading this, and the same holds true for Nelson and a few others, that they could be considered, and if nobody else has, they could, for the first time, be considered the first great global warriors. Nelson, Wellington, the guy in Africa, what was his name? Ketchum, global, because he did some fighting in India, and then they called him back to fight in Egypt, and the Boer War, Kerchum or something like that. These were the first of the great global warriors, and I haven't seen that term. Not that it's not out there, but if it's not, I'm putting it out there. Global, because today everything has to be global, or it's irrelevant. What a bunch of morons. But I think that these guys were hitting pounding the streets, hitting the streets globally. You know, Europe, India. Nelson was in the Caribbean, the West Indies, and in the Mediterranean, all over. And they got their orders, and for the most part, they obeyed them, but they didn't obey them to the letter of their orders. They did what they wanted to do. And if you read Nelson's history, you'll see that he'll say, well, we tell them we got the message late. You know, the ship was lost at sea bringing the orders. So, listen, if history wasn't about a lot of killing, it wouldn't be too bad. But I'm very glad I got some new books to cover India. One of the books was Meeting God, which once again is about India and the Hindus and how their whole day is a standing in front of God and God standing in front of them, and how they use individual creativity to step closer to God. And, you know, listen, I'd like to say that this, in a way, is what is being professed by other religions, but I just don't see it in these other religions. I just don't. But with the Hindu, you see it right away. You just see it right away. They are people apart, and they want to be apart because they want to be smack dab in the middle of their religious beliefs, because that's essential to who they are. And I'm not going to take much more time on this. This was supposed to be a short lesson, short little facts. By 400 BC, the population of India was 25 million. And also, in this time frame that we're talking about, the northern India was organized into 16 kingdoms. And they had coinage, they had writing. And that time frame, what we're talking about is the 7th century BC. Population was already 25 million people, 16 kingdoms in the northern part of the country. So that means that there was probably at least half that number in the southern part of the country. Okay, so that's it for now. We'll get some more reading done, and I'll come back to you. All right? Thanks. Enjoy the day. Bye.